Ginger, a long-time shuffler, and my son David, who was brought up and hammered nails in this building when he was a fairly young kid. I've been heard that there was quite a study going on, or concern at least, of the relationship between the land company and the club, and ways to reposition it to make it work better. And I was asked to be part of a group that was looking into this, and that's going to be the main emphasis of what I wanted to talk about tonight, because that goes quite a ways back in your history. And so it'll be a combination introduction to that subject, so you can have a feeling for the foundation that we're starting from as that group starts to work toward making a better arrangement. The Prairie Shufflers, as you know, began in 1956. By mid-1960, it was a real going club. They had their square dance hall, which they called the Shanty, remarkably, and it was located on the corner of 4th and Union. And that property has a canal running diagonally through it, and it doesn't look like it would be a place to put up a building, but there it was, and half of the building overlapped the canal. And unfortunately, the part that overlapped the canal was the caller's stand. So it was a never-ending threat to all the callers, guest callers that came. When the rumors started flying, there was a secret trapdoor that could take care of them if they didn't call it advance. Anyway, that hall was owned by the city of Kennewick, and the Shufflers had a rental that was exclusive. It was like it would be their own hall. They were able to hold dances or meetings or whenever they wanted to schedule it, and they could keep their equipment there. They could decorate it as they wanted. This was no palace, and it was probably aptly named the Shanty. It was built without insulation, but it had a big fireplace, and one of the duties of the president was to come down in the winter and start the fire before the dance started. The floor was a little bit slopey, and as the dance went on in the tip, the group would gradually migrate toward the other side of the room because of the slant in the floor. But that didn't bother. It was a happy place, and they felt very secure and at home. The club was growing. They were dancing over 15 squares a night on a regular night. And they had exclusive use of the place, and it was just like their own. Then something drastic happened. In the mid-60s, the city of Kennewick, who owned the building, gave them notice that they were going to terminate their rentals and tear the building down and widen 4th Avenue. And that caused, of course, a big disruption in the whole program. And they began to look around for different venues. They had 3 options, really: rent somewhere, buy a building, or build a building. The last 2 options were favored by most of the people, because there were a lot of people in the trades that were in the club. They had come down through the Snake River dams, building the dams one after another, and living in Pasco and Kennewick and the area. And they wanted to build. But the state federation at that time had a prohibition for square dance clubs owning their property. And so to buy another building, which was probably out of the question anyway because we didn't have the money to do it, or to build your own building. So that looked like we're up against a stone wall, and there looked like to be no way out. But then the suggestion came up, well, let's just form our own company, separate from the Prairie Shufflers, and you can form a corporation in the state of Washington and operate a company, a corporation, and not be hindered by the rules of the Square Dance Federation. So they examined that proposition and called a meeting of the membership because there was a lot of concern about somebody else owning the building and worry that they might get pushed out, the club might get pushed out at the whim of this other corporation. At the meeting, the committee that had looked into this tried to give assurance this would never happen. And this is part of our problem today. There were 3 links of chain that connected the Shufflers to the Prairie Land Company. The one was the promise that the corporation, Prairie Land Company, would state in its articles of incorporation that the purpose of the corporation was to provide a square dance place for the Prairie Shufflers. So that's one link in the chain. The second link in the chain was that the Prairie Land Company would give an exclusive 10-year lease to the Shufflers for 364 days of the year. 1 day a year, 1 day in May was reserved for the annual meeting of the corporation. Other than that, the Shufflers had complete control over the building. And the third link was that the board of directors on the land company would be made of 6 directors, 3 of whom would be proposed and put in position by the Prairie Shufflers. The other 3 would be put in position by the remaining directors. So with that close tie between the 2 organizations, which we're looking now of how do we change this, it convinced people that they finally had a path to making a building for themselves. The only obstacle now was money. And what was finally proposed was we will sell shares in the stock, just like any other corporation. And that will provide equity financing. And based on that, we might be able to get a loan to get some debt financing, and between the 2, be able to build a building with the sweat equity of the club. Now, trying to donate money to a cause is a losing proposition. I mean, you know, people just don't want to reach into their wallets, particularly when they're young, and most of the dancers were young, had families, got expenses. They're maybe not putting much money aside themselves, and it was tough to make a donation, a plain donation. But we figured if we offered them to buy an ownership in their building, it would be a different story. So after we allayed the fears of losing control of the building, we had a meeting, explained all that, and at the end of the meeting, we had passed the tablet around, and we had subscription for shares to Prairie Land Company for about $20,000. And that was the beginning of the financing. I may be a little fuzzy on some of the figures because it's a while ago, but that's about what it was. With $20,000 in the bank, then we thought, well, we could maybe get a loan for some amount because we now had some foundation, some collateral to reduce the risk of the bank in taking out the loan. But fortunately, at that minute, one of the members of the club, a woman named Prairie, stepped out and said, "What'd she do for us?" She invested in a lot of real estate in the Tri-City area. It was her thing to do. And she said, "I'll buy that lot up on Medellin that runs from Medellin all the way down to the railroad tracks. And I'll subdivide it and sell you half. And take a loan for the payment." So she did that. And that front half of the land that she bought, she maintained, eventually sold it for, I don't know if she sold it to the people who put the garages up or went through other ownerships in between. But she unwound the deal by selling that front property. And she gave us, I believe it was close to $20,000, and we signed a note for $20,000. Now we had $40,000 or thereabouts, and all we needed was a bunch of builders, and we had a load of them. So that began the construction of the hall. The first thing that was secured was the support structures for the roof, the trusses. We found out in the Hanford Reservation somewhere a bunch of trusses that were survivors of a fire in a building that had then been torn down. They were pretty loose, but they could be salvageable. The wood was sound. And there were, I think, 5 of them. It was either 4 or 5. And that truss span determined the width of this building. And the number of trusses we had determined the length of the building. How many it would take to, when we ran out of trusses, there couldn't be any longer a building. And that's what set this. The work parties to build the hall began in the late 60s, every Saturday, all day, every Saturday, all during that summer. And a contractor was hired to put up the block walls, put all the stuff up in the ceiling, in the floor, the kitchen, all the storage areas, bathrooms, were all built by the work parties. And we would start every Saturday morning that summer at 8 or 9 o'clock, whenever you could show up, and work till noon. The men would, and the women would show up at noon with a picnic lunch, and we'd all break for lunch and then pick up again and work later till the end of the day. The major features that I would want to point out is upstairs, there's an awful lot of wood supporting the trusses. And that was all engineered by a club member who was a construction engineer. And he told us what we had to put up, where they should be, how thick the beams should be. And if you've never been upstairs, I recommend you take a trip sometime. It's very impressive. It kind of reminds you a bit of the local pictures of Notre Dame when they rebuilt it. There's a lot of wood up there. The other real critical feature was this floor. This is a floor that the whole building is built around. It's unattached to the building itself. It's built on a post and beam system underneath the floor. And upon that post and beam feature, there are a subfloor of 2-inch thick lumber. And on top of the 2-inch thick lumber is the hardwood oak. And this floor was laid in about a day with a whole crew working. And this was the days before nail guns. So all this floor was hand laid by people who knew what they were doing and could tell other people who were maybe not skilled in the craft, but were office workers of one kind or another. And we all just pitched in and built it. And we're very fortunate that the club was the size it was because we had any skill you needed. We had a structural engineer to help us out. We had the craft people from all of the plumber, the heating, and the carpenters, everything to do all that kind of labor. We had a lawyer who helped draw up all of the papers and the formation of the corporation and the lease between the corporation and the Shufflers. And we had people with some business acumen who knew what direction we wanted to go to put it all together. So that's kind of what happened. Once the building was up, we had a grand opening, and I think I've seen in the current literature of the Prairie Shufflers the statement that the opening dance, there was 50 squares here, and that's true. There were, they could not all fit on the floor at once, but there were 50 squares of people bussed in from all over the state and all over the Northwest, and it was one really nice dance in here. And then the corporation started collecting the lease money from the club, and within a couple of years, we're able to pay the shareholders dividends, and those dividends added up to their original investment times 2. So everybody that had bought an original share and had come forward compensated, and there was money to do that. The loan was paid off to the Prairies, and within, I think, something like 4 or 5 years, everything was cleared out. The debt had been paid off, the shareholders been compensated, we were dancing 20 squares a night, and it went on from there. Well, there's just one other kind of closing thing I want to tell about in history. Some of you wonder why we're called Prairie Shufflers. I heard the story, I wasn't there myself, but I heard the story firsthand from someone who was, that the club very democratically solicited requests for names, possible names of the Square Dance Club, and the 2 most popular suggestions were Prairie Prancers and Sage Shufflers. And it came down to those 2. Well, it was touch and go, and they couldn't make up a decision very well. until someone made a comment. In those days, the men dressed in more square dance attire than they do these days. And there was a clip on their belt with a little towel, hand towel, and it was supposed to be used to dry your hands every now and then so your sweaty hands wouldn't offend the ladies. And those towels were usually monogrammed by the club. They were a club towel, and there was a club uniform too at the time. A pattern of clothing that was used for the dresses and shirts. Anyway, some said, well, you know, Prairie Prancers, that's going to not look good on the towel, PP. So now that was an uproar. So finally decided, well, look, we like both names, so let's combine them. Instead of making it Sage Shufflers or Prairie Prancers, let's make it the Prairie Shufflers. And that's how we got our name.
Great.
And the other historic aspect, which is probably mostly lost, although I gave you a clue in the beginning of my little talk, this is the Shanty. And it never had to be renamed. It was named after that old, worn-out building on Union and 4th Avenue that we called the Shanty when we danced there originally. And the name just transferred over. It's not the new Shanty, it's the Prairie Shuffler Shanty. And that's how we got here.